Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here tonight at our masterclass on change management, leading through change for innovation and resilience. I'm Marianne Lewis. I'm the Dean of the Lindner College of Business, and it's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And we're certainly looking forward to you joining us in the fall, and appreciate the chance this evening to help prepare you for the fall, but also get you energized. This is a chance for us to show you a little bit also about how Lindner operates, its unique approach to blending theory and practice, academic and experiential learning. So tonight we have three guests, including myself. So let me start with my own introduction. As I said, I'm Marianne Lewis. I am the Dean. I'm also a professor of management. I've been studying organizational leadership, and in particular, how organizations and, more importantly, their leaders manage tensions or organizational paradoxes. I've been studying that for about 30 years now. I'm also joined by Suzanne Masterson. Suzanne is a professor of management. She is an international thought leader in the areas of organizational behavior, fairness, and justice. She's also becoming a fellow this summer of the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, which is a tremendous honor. Congratulations, Suzanne. And she's our Associate Dean for Faculty Research and Lindner Culture. I'd also like you to meet Nick Castro. Nick is our Executive Director of Lindner's Office of Inclusive Excellence. Nick comes to us with tremendous experience and expertise, both in higher education and as a practitioner. He has led in this field for many years, including his work with the headquarters of the NCAA. So it's a pleasure to have both Nick and Suzanne with us this evening. Now, in terms of our purpose tonight, we're going to be talking about how organizational change serves as a powerful problem-solving tool, that supports organizations and their executives. It affects the way we lead and teach in Lindner, as well as at a personal level for ourselves, as well as you as students. So we'd like to examine some of the challenging problems that we're dealing with today from the lens of organizational change. And looking at particularly the two big challenges, COVID and its issues from a health and safety perspective, as well as technological or digital change. And second, the racial challenges, the unrest and disruptions to date. And these are two interesting challenges because they're really converging at a point in time that offers a tremendous challenge and an opportunity. Because when you think about disruption and this sorts of difficult issues, this is the time to make lasting change. Now, to help us think about change management, we want to talk about a theory and put it into practice. Now, I want to share with you one of my favorite mantras. It's from Kirk Lewin. He was a modern pioneer of study of organizational psychology and learning. And his favorite line was, "There is nothing so practical as a good theory." And now I'm a theorist. I believe this to my core. A good theory is simple, it's powerful, it provides a framework for which we can use to explore very complicated challenges. So let me show you briefly Kurt Lewin's model. This is his change model. And it's the beauty of a good model is that it's simple and clear. Basically, Lewin saw a three-phase approach, a three-phase process to change. It starts with unfreezing, questioning what's going on around you. Oftentimes that takes a shock. It takes something big that's happening around you to start to question your existing assumptions, the way you think, those routines that have become so commonplace, they're just muscle memory. So you unfreeze. The second phase is change, really questioning, well, why do I do this? What works? What doesn't work? How do we experiment and experiment purposefully to see what might work better and how we might learn and work in different ways? And then finally, refreezing. Refreezing means, how do you institutionalize the change? How do you make sure that these experiments and challenging conversations weren't just a fleeting moment? They were something that's going to last. They're going to transform the way you think, the way others around you operate, and change our organization. And when we look at more macro levels, change society. The other piece that we would stress is that when we look at Lewin's theory, oftentimes we think about these happening very rarely. Increasingly, when we talk with our employers, when we study this, and Suzanne and Nick will talk about this as well, we see this happening rapidly. So part of being a student and excelling in business in the future is about getting really good at learning and even better at change.
Figure out a way to first unfreeze. So you actually have to figure out what's holding you back. In organizations, we often have to think about the things that are holding the organization back from moving forward. What are the restraining forces that we think about? And so in terms of a running regime, it might be, well, it's hard to get up in the morning. I have too many other things on my plate. I don't have time to do it. And you actually have to unfreeze out of those routines so that you enable yourself the space to make that change, right? You then move forward and change. And a lot of times what we're going to talk about here is experimenting to see what works. Are you a morning runner? Are you an evening runner? Is there a prompt that makes it easier for you to move in this new direction? And then once you move in that direction and you start that running regime, how do you refreeze? How do you develop that into a habit that you're going to keep doing and that you don't slide backwards? So you might start setting your alarm earlier, put your running shoes right beside your bed, set up other things that enable you to keep moving forward and make it much harder to slide back. In organizations, it could be as easy as putting some policies in place that crystallize the new change. So for example, if you have an organization that's been rewarding people on an individual basis and they now want to really move toward a team-based model, they're going to have to unfreeze those HR practices that they've got for recognizing individual performance, rewarding individual performance, make some changes and refreeze them back into actual policies that crystallize what they're trying to do.
Thank you. As Suzanne said, and before I take this off the slide, I think in particular, I would emphasize, as she said, one of the beauties of a really good theory is that it's simple and clear. So what we'd like to do now is turn back to the two wicked problems that we raised at the beginning and actually discuss what we're seeing in the corporate world, in higher ed, and even more personally as opportunities for change that really do fuel innovation and resilience. Let's start on the COVID side. And if we walk through this model, we know the big changes and the challenges that we face. We face them certainly from a public health perspective. We've seen it with the lockdown. In the corporation world, and I'd love Suzanne and Nick to jump in here as well, what we're hearing from our corporate partners, and it's one of the beauties of being the leading co-op and internship business school, is we have lots of good co-op partners, is they're telling us that really the big unfreeze came from a recognition that the digital transformations that they've all been working on, how to move more systems using AI, using data, using technology in a variety of ways, they had to move to very quickly to enable their employees to move home, as well as to reach out to their clients and their customers in very different ways. Give you an example of some of those challenges. We certainly have good friends here in Cincinnati with Kroger. Kroger's still one of the third largest retail companies in the world behind Walmart in terms of brick and mortar. When they went to lockdown, clearly they were considered an essential business because of the food situation, but they had to manage their supply chains in very different ways and their data. They're very good at data typically. They started with the Kroger Plus card, you might remember, but during the lockdown, they realized that they hadn't seen different gaps in their supply chains and their data. So it caused them to question, in important ways, existing assumptions about the way they work. I might turn to Suzanne to talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of the unfreezing at Lindner and or in the corporate world as well.
Well, I think for us, a lot of the unfreezing was this idea of how do we provide the quality educational experience that we want to do remotely, right? Because a lot of what we think about is face-to-face learning, and we think about face-to-face service for our students who come in and want advising and those type of things. And I think we've learned a lot about what it means to be able to connect with people remotely, to be able to Our IT team quickly jumped into action, and I'll tell you, we have one of the best IT teams anywhere. And so got 50 webcams within 3 days and distributed them. They've worked on different kinds of technology that allow people to do what they were doing in the classroom with document cameras and whiteboards from home. And really helped with all the experimenting that we have to do to really make sure that we're adapting to this. And one of the interesting things I think with this model, and something that we hear when we talk, so for example, I've done executive ed with our friends at Kroger, is that this unfreeze, change, refreeze model is moving faster and faster all the time. And so when Kurt Lewin first proposed this model, you would refreeze and you would stay there until the pressure for change became so great that you would then have to go through and unfreeze again and start moving. Now the cycle is very quick. So even as you're refreezing in place, you're still saying, okay, what else do we have to unfreeze and keep going?
I think that's important. And Nick, I'd love to turn to you as the leader in the area of inclusive excellence. You work closely with business fellows, Lindner Women in Business, Pride at Lindner. I think we've learned quite a bit about our students in this process as we really question some of our underlying assumptions.
That's absolutely correct. And I like to go back to what both you and Suzanne have talked about in terms of when you're unfreezing, we're talking about changing the status quo. We at Lindner have been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion for a very long time. Business Fellows is a program that's about 10 years old. That's our program for our Black, Latino, and Native American students. So this is not new to us. However, the change, the unfreeze, is that we have to take a deeper dive. We have to have more uncomfortable conversations. The death of George Floyd has made us look at racial tensions, systems of oppression, and social justice as well. And that requires us, even though we've been focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion and realizing the power of it, now we have to go a little deeper. We have to have those difficult conversations within the college and the university with our corporate partners to talk about, okay, are we doing the best we can for our Black students, for our Black faculty, for our faculty, or for women? So really the unfreezing is not that we haven't had discussions on diversity, equity, inclusion, or have resources. I mean, the fact that we have my position and my office and these programs that we've had for almost 10 years now is proof of that. The unfreeze is, okay, we really have to talk about these really difficult, uncomfortable conversations about race and system.
I think it's important the way you said that, Nick, because when we talk about unfreezing, the reason why that stage is so critical is that we go about our daily efforts, whether it's in an organization, in higher ed, or just our personal day-to-day lives. We go through a routine. It's like muscle memory. And even though you're working in areas, you heard Suzanne say we have one of the best IT teams anywhere at UC in Lindner. Likewise, our Inclusive Excellence Office is tremendous. But then you have this hit of real challenging situations, and it makes you step back and say, but is it enough? Are we really using these resources? Are we asking ourselves what's working and what's not in a much different type of way, a different level, which takes us into the unfreezing, not the unfreezing, the actual change.
Can I jump in for 1 second there, Marianne?
Yeah,
so I just want to say, because you prompted me to think about this is a little bit of the boiled frog analogy, right? And so whenever I teach change, it's the day of bad animal analogies, but the total quality management literature talks about the boiled frog analogy, which is if you throw a frog into a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out. It recognizes that change. But if you put a frog in a pot of lukewarm water and you gradually raise the temperature, it will never recognize the change because it's so gradual. One of the problems with unfreezing is often it takes such a great pressure for you to recognize that you have this need to change and to unfreeze, because routines are so comfortable. As Marianne said, you have this muscle memory. This is how you do it. This is where you are driving somewhere and you don't even remember how you got there because you're on automatic pilot, right? If there's nothing out of the ordinary, it doesn't prompt you to change. But what we have to do, and what we're trying to do in Lindner, and what we would like to help students learn how to do, is to be the frog in the lukewarm water that's noticing everything that's happening around it and is recognizing that need to change before there's this final impulse that everyone else recognizes that you have to change, right? So this is part of what we're training ourselves to do, and part of what we need to do as this cycle gets faster and faster.
I think it's so important, because you're right. The reason why we're talking about this today is that there has been this shock in the system that has forced the unfreezing. Really good leaders and really good students, just continuous learners, are asking themselves, how do I almost create the shock myself? Because I'm so self-aware, because I'm paying attention. So I think it's really important that you say that. Now, as we turn to the change piece, what I hope that you're seeing here is that, again, I go back to the theory and practice blend, is that we can take a good theory and we can look at it in a very corporate setting, in a very different setting like education, and at this personal, what does it mean for the individual? So when we get into the change feature of Lewin's cycle, this is where the point is, we've now shaken ourselves enough and others to say, let's have the difficult conversations. But now it's the hard work. Who's in those conversations? How are you listening? How are you experimenting to see what works and doesn't work? Suzanne, in your work with exec ed, when you start to push on the change levers, what do you find is particularly helpful?
So I think this idea of experimentation and the idea that you don't have to have it perfect from the very beginning, right? So part of this is learning through doing. I think that when we talk to some of the leaders in executive ed, it can be paralyzing to not know what to do, or to have so many options in front of you and say, I'm going to wait until I know the perfect path to go forward to make this change, right? And so part of what we're seeing with partners like Kroger is that they're using more agile systems where they're going through quick sprints, where they're actually experimenting continuously, reporting back to each other, checking on how that went, versus saying, okay, here's this 18-month project. We know where we want to get to at the end, and we've got this goal, and we just keep working toward it, right? They take that and they break it down into 6-week or 6-day sometimes sprints, where they try something, check it, see how it's working, test it out with the customer, take it back, adjust it again. So a lot now of this, again, this accelerated change process is not saying we've got all the time in the world to make this change and we know where we want to be in 18 months time. It's continually experimenting, trying the problem solving, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, getting immediate feedback, and really learning through doing.
And sometimes we certainly see organizations coming to experts, outsiders that can bring in a fresh perspective. Nick, I know that some of our corporate partners have been reaching out to you as well for help in how to actually have the conversations internally. Do you want to share a little bit about those
Sure.
conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note that different organizations are at different levels in their structures and leadership. There are some corporations and corporate partners that we work with that have diversity councils, employee resource groups. So, African American engineers or, Hispanic accountants, they have these resource groups within their organizations. There are others that, based on what's going on in the world, it's the first time they're having these conversations. So they reach out to folks like us and say, hey, how do we start these conversations? What are some frameworks or theories, right? We're going back to the theory. What are some theories that we can use to start to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and have those conversations with.
Oh, I think Nick, you just froze. All right, we'll let Nick come back to us.
Good?
You froze for a minute, but you're back.
All right, okay. We get corporate partners that reach out to us frequently, asking for diverse talent, right? And what we've known and what corporations have learned at it is that it's not just to check a box. Corporations are going from looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion from a compliance standpoint, because we have to do it because federal law mandates it, to looking at it from the business case. And right, so corporations no longer just want to check a box and say, great, we have a dozen African American employees, we have 20 on our team. No, they're creating these employee resource groups. They're reaching out to Lindner and saying, we really want these diverse students and we value what they bring to our organizations and those diverse ideas. So really, with that business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, that they're making that shift and making that change from more of a compliance view of diversity to how does this help my organization grow and be at the cutting edge.
So if we go back to this, to Lewin's theory, we talk about unfreezing, change, and refreezing. How do we help organizations and ourselves in both of these situations, leveraging technologies, working through COVID, and shifting to a much more embedded approach towards inclusion and equity? Let's shift from making the change and experimenting towards how do we institutionalize it? How do we reframe and refreeze our work so that it lasts? And I think this is particularly challenging in the second issue because we know we've had issues before and it hasn't necessarily stuck, for a better word, right? This cannot be a flash in the pan. And I feel the same for COVID, actually. We're learning so much through technology. So Suzanne, when you're talking to executives, how do you help them realize that it's not enough to have had the conversations and to experiment? It has to become part of the institution.
So I think that the part of that lesson is really the continually accelerating rate of change, right? I think that there is some recognition that there has to be some learning that gets institutionalized. And I think it's a little bit easier on the digital side than on the diversity and inclusion side, because I think that, and I'll let Nick speak to that more, but I think that on the change side, there's so much external pressure and competitiveness in industry that it is more of a pressure that they're feeling against their competitors, that they can't slide backwards, that they're continuously feeling like they need to be on the cutting edge. Whereas I worry a little bit, and like I said, I'll turn it over to Nick, that there's a perception more on the inclusive excellence side that we'll talk about it for a while and people will feel good, and that's good enough. And unfortunately, that's not good enough. And so I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing a lot of pressure right now for people to really put actions behind their words and to keep that process moving forward. And the actions are what refreeze it in place. Words are great, but the actions and actually putting things in place. And so Nick, I don't mean to step on that. I hope that was appropriate, but let me turn it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of refreezing it, what we are doing at Lindner specifically, so we've recently created an Inclusive Excellence Council so that we have a structure that will promote diversity, equity, and inclusion on a consistent and regular basis, not just from one office or one person, but a whole entire team that connects to all different areas of the college. I spoke earlier about the business case for diversity and inclusion, and one of the things that we did this past year was we engaged every single freshman with the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and within the context of the 6 traits of inclusive leadership. Those traits are cultural intelligence, curiosity, collaboration, courage, commitment, and cognizance. So those last 3 are important given our current situation. Courage to look at our blind spots as inclusive leaders, to talk about bias, to talk about privilege. Commitment to continue to do this work because it's not easy to have those difficult conversations on systems of oppression and our identities that we have. And then really the courage, to cognizance of those biases and privileges and knowing that. So it's important that our freshmen and all of our students learn about the business case for diversity and inclusion and how to be an inclusive leader so that they can access diverse markets, so that they can have access to diverse talent and have diverse customers really feel like the products and services that they're creating is really for them. It really helps future business leaders not have these blind spots. It helps future business leaders not have to be reactive to situations like the one that we're in and be proactive. So, one of the things that we're doing to refreeze it is we're presenting this theory and this content to our freshmen first year to say, if you want to be an effective business leader, you need the tool, just like business ethics and accounting and econ and anything else. Inclusive leadership is one of those tools that's going to help you excel as a professional, as an individual, and help your organization excel and reach out to those different markets. So really, those are some of the ways that we're helping to refreeze this. We offer diversity training in our college and at our university. One of the things that's different here is that this has to go beyond training. We can't program our way out of this or just do one training and like Suzanne said, and okay, we're done. You know, we've had our conversation about racial injustice. We've had our conversation about inequity. This has to be a culture shift for, you know, and I'm not even just talking about, you know, University of Cincinnati, in higher ed in general, right? And in corporate America as well. So looking at it as a culture shift as opposed to something we can program or workshop our way out of.
I want to share a question. Samuel Merkel posed this, and I think this is a great question. You know, when we're talking about transformation, it's a question is, you know, how do we foster agility in that transformation? Because when we talk about refreezing, it sounds like it's rigid. And I don't think that is what we're talking about, especially to go back to something Suzanne said earlier, that these cycles are happening so fast that actually you need to be very resilient and agile in your processes. So, I mean, I'll start with my own, my research actually has looked at agility in a variety of ways. So one of the ways I like to think about it, and when I work with executives myself, is I talk about frameworks. I talk about what you don't want to be rigid are things like practices in a very fine-grained way, because those should be continuously improving. Right? You do want to apply them. You want things to become a habit, but you also want them to be continuously changing as you're learning, as the world around you is evolving. But what you don't want to change, and this is what really you want to get frozen at a higher level, and it's more challenging, is the vision and the shared principles. Because then other things can continue to adapt as you're getting a better sense for really what the future needs to look like and what are the actions that need to be taken to get there. So I share this. We had some discussions in the college today about digital transformation, and particularly about making sure that we're learning from our move to remote to make more out of technology in the classroom for our student services, whether it's career services or advising or other ways. And we were realizing it's going to keep changing, right? So you're right, Samuel, we don't want to freeze that completely. But what we do want to put a stake in the ground in is, where are we going? Let's agree, and I think we had very strong agreement today, that we know that higher education needs to be more digitally enabled. It lets us, we've learned this, it lets us reach out so much better to guests, corporate executives, different kinds of tools, because you all know how to use the internet. We have international networks of colleagues that we can draw from, as well as alumni and employers we can bring into the classroom. But the point is, we set the bar high. It's a new bar, it's a higher bar. It's about how do we develop digital professionals and enhance our learning digitally. But to me, there's something powerful to having a framework in our minds that's also shared, because then we can continue to be agile as we move forward and really build good practices and institutional efforts. Suzanne, Nick, thoughts on agility in this realm?
I would just echo exactly what you said. I think the question, which asks, what if you don't know what the end state should be? And I think organizations a lot of times thought they knew what the end state should be, but it was going to take 12 to 18 months to get there. And by that time, things had changed, right? So these new sprints and the way that they're thinking about transformation in these very short sprints allows them to make incremental change versus trying to do these transformational things all at one time. So that they can keep that going. But I think that the key that Marianne mentioned is this idea of knowing who we are, what our values are, and how we're going to get there, right? So we know what we're trying to achieve. We've got this vision that we're working toward, and we're going to keep taking steps that continuously get us closer and closer to there. So it's not this idea that we're in the wind and we don't know where we're going. If you take Kroger, for an example, and the way that they moved toward click lists, they knew the kind of service that they wanted to provide to their customers. And so they kept tweaking, making changes, working on it. It was really fun to talk to the folks when they were working on that and making those digital changes. And they started working differently as they tried to put that together as a new way of doing business and working toward it internally, so that they knew where they wanted to go, but they did it in these short sprints to try to gradually move themselves there and to keep testing and learning as they were going.
Maybe, go ahead, Nick.
I would agree that agility is essential. And when we're talking about this in terms of, in the context of leadership, there's a continuum. So there are 4 steps in inclusive leadership that we can look at as a continuum. The first step is unaware, right? Maybe we are unaware of an issue or a challenge. A second step is becoming aware, saying, okay, you know, there's an issue here. There's a racial issue. There's a system of inequity, whether it's education, healthcare, you know, criminal justice. There is an issue here. The third step is becoming being active and saying, okay, I'm going to do something about it. And the fourth step is using your privilege and your power to be an advocate and really change policy. But it's important to note on those 4 steps on that continuum, we all go back and forth. Someone might be an advocate when it comes to race, but they're just accessing LGBTQ issues and go from that advocate position all the way back to unaware and learn. So the agility is important.
I think Nick, as you were saying that, I want to call out. You can hear us. We're playing with a number of things that we're using Lewin's model. I mean, we're talking about different settings, corporate and education, different levels, like executives to individual students to ourselves, and we're flipping between 2 issues. Now, we're not doing that to be overly complicated or to sound a bit chaotic. It really is the nature of the changes that we're dealing with. And in fact, one of the things that we, both as researchers, practitioners, and for our students, want to help students build in terms of their own adaptability and resilience is the complexity of the way that you think. Because these elements, while they sound separate, they really end up coming together in the way you work, the way you learn, and certainly the way you lead. So we want to be working those together. The others may have another view of this, but you know, this is, I suppose maybe this is a typical day of a lot of meetings, but my first meeting was actually with a group of women executives that we meet once a month. And we had members from P&G, one of the major marketing firms, 2 nonprofits. It's a wonderful group that I get to work with. And everybody was sharing the really challenging issues that they were facing as leaders. And we were ping-ponging back and forth between digital issues around COVID and health issues around COVID to racial issues and moving from what Nick just described as that unaware to advocate mode and at different levels. And by the end of that conversation, I think it was both empowering and concerning how fast we were all trying to learn through a very complicated situation. And I think that's one of the reasons that we also want to make sure students are learning together, learning with us as faculty and administrators and staff, but also working with our employers, because these are big, wicked, knotted problems, and we need to tackle them in a way that has some clarity, like a framework and a theory such as Lewin's, and starts picking at the challenges. Suzanne, as you've been working with faculty and staff over the last couple of weeks, or I should say months, do you see particular opportunities to kind of fuel this ongoing cycle of learning?
Oh, I think so. I think when we had to transition in March, there was a lot of fear, right? So we've had some online courses for a very long period of time. We've got an online MBA program and some other online programs. And so those are a little bit different than suddenly taking a face-to-face class and going remote. And we had multiple instructors who hadn't done that before, multiple professors who just hadn't had the opportunity to teach in the online. And so that, with all the other changes that were going on with COVID-19 and concerns and everything. But what's interesting, I think, when I talk to faculty and staff, but particularly faculty, talking about what they've discovered in the classroom, in the remote classroom, that now they wouldn't go back, and staff the same way in terms of their interactions with students. And so I think we've learned a lot about where the value added is and where there's opportunities to really kind of play and experiment at the in the things that we do. And Lindner is made up of people who love to learn. I think people who end up in higher education, we all love to learn. We love to face different kinds of problems and think about them. And many of us, I think, are theorists at heart, right? That we love to think about things and develop new models and think about how they work. And so I think it's really fun to be having conversations with folks where they say, this has actually broken me out of a routine where I felt like my class had to be me coming in and me lecturing and telling students and connecting them with some things. And there had to be these kinds of tests and these kinds of hurdles that students went through to an actual freeing of, an actual freeing of how can I think about this, and where do I feel like I'm adding value to the students, and how am I going to turn this problem on its head to give students the chance to explore this problem in a way that they haven't before. And I can tell you, I'm teaching an online class right now that was designed to be online from the very beginning. And I've spent my office hours and the beginning of each week finding, it's a human resource management class, finding COVID-19 related issues to bring in. I'm bringing them into office hours. I'm asking them to explore them. And it's been a really fun way to take a pretty straightforward topic and say, okay, and so how do we adapt this to what we're thinking about right now? And how are you going to leave this class thinking about people management issues in a new age?
I think that's a wonderful example, and you're right. We've seen so many different versions of experiments. We heard some of them today. We had a faculty coffee hour online, and heard different examples of bringing in experts. Someone talking about possibly doing kind of a vlogger experience with their courses, while getting people out. I mean, just really creative approaches. But I'd also turn, Nick, to thinking about. We've learned more about the diversity of students, I think, in this process. And what I mean by that, we've always talked about the diversity of learning styles, of personal needs, but I think we've learned that we don't always know what we don't know. I mean, you and I have talked about this. We've been mandatory laptop for many years. And then we start to realize when we're actually fully remote, not everybody has a laptop or is quite as savvy as we think they are. And it pushes us probably in very important ways, not probably, but to think about what is the need of the individual learner and how do we meet them where they are, but also bring them up faster, because our goal is transformation of people. I mean, that's what you do in higher ed. Nick, anything to add there? Because I do think we're learning so much about differences in needs.
Absolutely. And I think, again, both of these wicked problems that you've talked about have put a spotlight on things, right? So thinking about diverse students coming to the college, maybe decided this is not the year to come to Lindner because my parent lost their job, or I have to stay home and take care of a sibling because of COVID and something, things like that. So thinking about those challenges that we normally wouldn't think about, but really in terms of kind of going back to what Suzanne was talking about, one of the challenges that's exciting to think how we're going to create this is that community. Because for particularly first generation students who they're the first in their family to go to college, or underrepresented students, Black and Latino students and women, part of that community is really important in that transition from high school to college, and having that support network is crucial. So one of the challenges that we face in terms of inclusive excellence and other, student affairs groups is how do we create that community virtually? And we're going to be, on campus in the fall as well, but there will be a significant amount of remote learning and remote gatherings as well. So focusing on how we build that community, how we build that support, how for a first generation student who doesn't have any experience with higher ed, does that and doing the best we can to support those students.
Well, thank you, Nick. I do want to make sure, it's wonderful to have 34 of you on here with us. I would love to hear some questions from you. You've all had different experiences. I mean, talk about the diversity of needs and experiences, but also goals. We'd love to hear some more questions from you on your side. And maybe in particular areas, I'll throw out a question that I know is on some people's minds. When you start to think about coming in the fall, how do we enable that change, meaning the change from high school and home to on campus? So some of what Nick just said, I'll call out a bit further. We're building a fall semester that's going to enable a lot of choice, because we need people to not only be healthy and well and continue to learn, but to also be comfortable and to know that this is the right place and the right time for them. So there will be options that are both online and face-to-face. And we're working through that variation now so that you have flexibility. And our goal in that is not only to give you the flexibility you need in the fall, but also to help you build your own skills at adaptability, because these are skills. Learning is a skill, adaptability and agility are skills, as well as the power and potential of inclusive leadership. So we're talking about a variety of transformational skills that really come through personal change as well as organizational change. Let's see what other kinds of questions you might have. And I know we have advisors and admissions teams people on the call. Feel free, I know you're getting questions as well. If you're hearing it from other students, they're probably this is a good chance to put them on the table here.
While we're waiting to see what other questions might come up, I just might throw in one of my recent areas of research has been on workplace design. So open spaces in organizations, the move from private offices to cubicles to open space, and now to remote working. And one of the things that we've heard, for example, when we had a meeting with our business advisory council recently, was that a lot of the people, the business people that we're talking to are saying, we're not going to go back to the old normal. We have discovered that we can do Teams meetings pretty easily remote. That travel to client sites is not as important as we once thought that it was. That co-ops can work even if we're not always bringing people physically on site, and that in fact we need the digital lessons that those co-op students can bring us from their perspective. And so I think that I'm kind of excited to get back into this area of research, because I think that we're going to see the design of organizations change in terms of the way that they shape their workspace, the way that it shapes the designs that they're going to have. And I think that's another learning that we're having out of this, is that even though it can be frustrating at times to say, I want everything face-to-face, I want to go back to this full experience, I think organizations are saying, we're maybe not going back to the whole full experience. So we're having a different experience, and how do we make that work?
I think that's a really important question as well. I mean, we have a wonderful real estate center as an example, and we have real estate as one of our specializations in finance. And the area, the issue that Suzanne's talking about workplace design, is coming up heavily through our partners in real estate, who are both a bit nervous, to say the least, because they're not sure what the real estate market's going to do, but they're also using it as an opportunity to talk to their clients and reshape the way that they think about space, and the kind of space you need, the amount of space you need, and its utilization. So I think there's a host of things to be considering there. I've got a couple of other questions here. One question: what is the best way to make the most of remote learning in order to get the same sort of learning you would from a face-to-face course? So this is from a student perspective. How have you found that students might engage better in remote learning to get the most out of that experience? Suzanne,
so I'll throw out there again, because I've been teaching online for a number of years, and I was not sure how much I was going to like teaching online when I first started. And I will say that the interesting thing about remote and online learning is that it's a little bit more democratic than the classroom. In the classroom, you've always got that one person who speaks up a lot, and other people who can hide a little bit, because everyone else is carrying the discussion, right? And so in discussion boards and those kinds of things, it's a little bit more democratic. You get to hear from everyone. I often feel like I know the class a little bit more evenly in a remote or online setting than I do in the face-to-face, which seems a little bit counterintuitive at the front. I'd say from a student perspective, I would try to engage in those discussion boards, and also with the professor. The one thing that I really miss when I'm teaching online is having that back and forth, which is why I try to schedule multiple office hours and different opportunities to have students have that. I'd say if you're learning remote and there are some synchronous sessions, I would take advantage of them every time I get, because that interaction and that exchange of ideas really, to me, adds to the flavor of the class. So I know sometimes it's really tempting to say, well, it's asynchronous. I can do it when I want to. I would take advantage of every synchronous opportunity that there is to have some of that exchange.
Well, and it reminds me that of a comment that I've heard from so many faculty. We used to have a joke about office hours, because you set up your office hours and then not many students come. But what I'm hearing from faculty is far more students come to remote office hours. And in fact, they work very well. I think it's one of those learnings well beyond COVID that we will all have more remote office hours and other ways for students to feed in their questions and comments remotely, because it is more democratic. And actually, we find ways that students get more comfortable to interact with faculty and sometimes even with each other.
I'm also going to add in there, learn some virtual networking skills. So I gave a talk yesterday on virtual networking to students over in the College of Medicine. And it can be difficult to network remotely or virtually, but boy, now is when that relationship building is really important. And so to take the time to reach out and to make those connections before and to develop the network is really important. And so it's a different skill set, and one that I think we're really going to have to think about how we bring that in into the COVID-19 world.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that. So we have a professional sales program. We have a professional sales center at Lindner, and we have courses and a minor in sales that really does well, and students succeed very well. Well, when we went remote, I was talking to the faculty there, and they were saying, "Ooh, this is tricky. We've got to teach, figure out how to do sales presentations and have the students deliver them and grade them remotely and do these other things." Well, about halfway through, especially with the kind of conversation Suzanne's having, is talking about with employers, they realized we need to keep doing this because employers need you to be able to make the sale, build the relationship, close the deal, negotiate remotely as well as face-to-face. It is a very challenging, different kind of skill set than when you can use your body emotion, your body language. You can be a little bit more emotive and bonding face-to-face. And it was interesting. I was talking to an executive at LPK, which is a major marketing firm, I think it was last week. And she was talking to me about their challenge giving these big presentations, right? They're trying to land clients for major marketing product development kind of deals. And she said they've actually brought in actors or acting coaches to talk to them about, because in a flat screen, it's just different to try to get across the energy that you can in a face-to-face presentation. But I think these are important examples to demonstrate. It's one thing to say you're working or learning remotely as a Band-Aid because you've had to. It's another, and this is where we're heading very quickly, to say we need to have these skills. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be remote, but it means we need to be really good at using the technology, building relationships, networking, as Suzanne said, and doing other efforts that really are different and connected to what we do face-to-face. So I'm seeing some of these other questions. Let me see. I think here's a different kind of a question: is how do we help individuals get more comfortable getting out of their comfort zone? So in some ways, how do we help them get more comfortable unfreezing?
That's such a good question.
It is such a good question. Go ahead.
So one of the things I think, again, as teaching organizational behavior, is thinking about how you help people build that self-efficacy, right? And so we talk about things like small wins, which really fits with experimentation, right? So you're not going from I'm going back to running. You're not going from jogging one day to running a marathon, but you build up and you have these small wins that build your efficacy that you can do the ultimate thing, right? And also it's about watching other people do it, right? So having role models that help you get comfortable with it. And we've got great students, upperclassmen who are great role models and who have gone through some of these experiences and can help mentor folks if you get involved with student organizations and different kinds of things that way. And also just the last one that I'll mention is managing your emotions, right? Is when you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach, rather than labeling it as fear and anxiety, that it's actually excitement for the opportunity that you're going through. And again, by making these small wins and doing experimental things in class, by having these growth opportunities that are agile and are step by step as opposed to throwing you into the deep end, I think that there's really people develop that comfort zone and really explore to the edges where they didn't think they'd be before.
So on my end, as a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner, for me, it's really important to create safe spaces. So in workshops that I'm facilitating or discussions that I'm having, letting individuals know that it's okay to ask that question. It's okay to not know what what LGBTQ means, or what whatever it is that they have not had access to before or experience with. So creating that safe space and saying it's okay to ask questions, this is the place to do it. Letting them know that whatever we talk about in those safe spaces, the lessons learned, that leaves the room, personal things, personal experiences with racial injustice or with privilege or bias, those examples stay with us in that room, in that safe space. So really creating that safe space so folks can be uncomfortable and take that learning with them. Because as we all know, that's where the learning happens, right? We don't want to be way outside the red zone, but we want to be slightly uncomfortable to make sure that we are learning.
I would add to that. So I said at the beginning that my area of research is around organizational paradoxes, which basically means tensions, like the need to be more technologically savvy and more human, more efficient and more flexible, more controlled and more agile, right? These things that actually we need working simultaneously, and it builds incredible discomfort. And it reminds me, one of our alumni is Paul Pullman. Paul was the former CEO and chairman of Unilever, a major product firm similar to Procter & Gamble. And I was interviewing him about how he manages tensions to facilitate change. And he said, I believe so much in the power of tensions to spark change that I look for them everywhere. You need to be comfortable in the discomfort. You actually need to see it as an opportunity. And even though it might make your heart race and you get a little bit anxious when you get in these difficult situations, you actually approach them as opportunity. And that is a really big change in mindset. So the colleagues that I work with, I've got a really good team that's actually in different parts of the world now. We study something called the paradox mindset. And part of that is your comfort in tensions. And it is something that, as we've been studying it, we know you can learn. And one of the key ways that you learn is through practice. Because every difficult situation, difficult conversation, challenging experiment brings with it new things, but also something similar. And it is in your confidence. Because even if you struggle, even fail in one situation, you learn that you can get back up. You can do it. It's a constant process, and that confidence builds comfort in the discomfort. So I think that's a really key area, and I'm glad you said that. We also had a really nice comment from a parent here who's sitting in for her son, who's talking about a different kind of a tension between being rigid, meaning being very controlled. Her son's working in, it sounds like a nursing home. Did I get that right? In a nursing home that has to have very clear, probably protocols, constraints, and at the same time being agile, because every individual in that home is a human being who has different challenges and needs, and how to manage and work through that. So just an important issue of, again, managing those tensions through it. So I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Well, we have a couple more minutes. I just want to see if there are any parting words. Nick, can I start with you as we have an opportunity to say goodbye to this wonderful group?
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure to be able to chat with you all. One of the things that I mentioned is community. And I am so excited I'll become part of that family. We are going to welcome you with open arms, and we are here to support in any and every way. So looking forward to seeing you in the fall.
Thank you, Nick. Suzanne.
I just want to say thank you for joining us tonight. I have really enjoyed being a part of this conversation, and I have to say that's one of the things that I love about Lindner is having these kinds of thought-provoking conversations between faculty and staff and students, where we take something like a theory from Lewin from the 1930s, and we can think about how it's still relevant today and apply it to different situations, and tie that into our links here to the business community. And so it's that combination of the learning and the theorizing with the actual doing that I think makes Lindner a unique experience and what gets me going there every day. But thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for the tremendous admissions and advising team who are on this call, and for all of you. We'll be sharing this, the recording, with others as well. I just want to reiterate my appreciation for tonight and this opportunity to learn and work with you. Again, we can't wait to see you face to face. We look forward to joining Lindner. Keep learning, embracing change, be well, and go Bearcats. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.